that energy flow is a great example of controlling the energy. When that energy came online, it was a blast, and it's an uncalculable blast. The type of, no one knows how much anger there is toward this group of elites at the top of Western civilization that we know as the Jews. I'm always asked these days, because people know that, or a lot of close associates now know that I know Bob's, so on and so forth, and Bob is friends with David Duke, or I guess it's Dr. Duke now. I'm always asked about him. I don't really know anything about him. Never met him, and probably never will. His books are interesting, and Bob is always asked about him and why he always talks about the Jews. And Bob's response, since he knows him, I'll use his response. His response was, well, someone's got to talk about him all the time, all around the world, and that's his job. You don't like him doing it? Take up his job. Well, he's good at his job, I guess. He stays on him night and day. But Hebrews are an interesting story. I can go into some history about them, but I'm going to skip that today. But that's a great example of energy flowing. It just blew up online, and I wanted that across the board, and hate speech laws or something like that would have done that across the board in 1998. Because let's face it, it's basically illegal to talk about the Jews, and all that other kind of stuff. Anything related to them, it's just taboo, and of course, it just doesn't work. With if everyone's watching you and you're preaching, hate, but you end up some of your leaders, and it isn't Natalie Portman, it's not Queen Amidala, it's Abe Foxman. I mean, it's like the Nazis chipped this kid at birth, because he's just a stereotype, antagonistic and constantly trying to square a circle. It's just funny stuff. But of course, the Anti-Defamation League doesn't harass little Christians in Southeast Asia. Yeah, there's a lot of Christians in Southeast Asia. They don't harass the large growing Christian population in Africa. There's a huge Christian population in Africa, believe it or not. They don't harass Christians in Latin countries. They don't worry about the cross there, do they? No, only Indo-European Christians, only indigenous white rabbits who happen to be Christians. That's all they harass. But of course, that's not racial. Sure it is. How many people have ever pointed that one out? Point that out at your next meeting. I mean, they're not harassing Christians. If they were harassing Christians, they'd be in a lot of other places on the planet. No, they're harassing little Aryans, for lack of a better word, little European children, in a roundabout way, with their hate and whatever, and everything else in their area. But they don't walk around. You got some of these Vietnamese or some of these Southeast Asian, Korean type Christian churches in America. Even they don't bother with them. They don't really bother with black churches too much, unless it's someone says something about them directly. But what they do is they wage a war against European Christians. And that's an interesting point. And now I'm going to go into the third, fourth, and fifth position, but I'd just like to make a point. I don't really know the Dr. Dukes or the people that have been in the white nationalist or racial struggle for any length of time. I don't really know him. Bob's the only one that I've really seen operate. And since I don't distrust his loyalty to white rabbits, I basically look for his position on different people that I don't know that he knows. And since he doesn't distrust Dr. Duke's loyalty to white rabbits, neither do I. But I don't know him. I can't really comment about him. His books are interesting, and he certainly does make hay around the world. When he talks about those Hebrews, and when he goes on things like CNN and confronts Wolf Blitzer. But now for the third position. The third position was something developed at the beginning of National Socialists, the National Socialist movement, and what they did was in the beginning they opposed capitalism and communism. They opposed both sides of the equation, and that in many ways caused a big brouhaha in many different ways. And the third position also had a tremendous impact to this day, because they control the energy flow. Yeah, they control the energy flow, negative and positive. It's something positive that they control the negative energy flow on is environmental struggle. All the environmental groups, the Green Party, this big Green Party, every single one of them came out of the Third Reich, believe it or not. Now, they may not agree with anything racial, whatever, but they still control that energy. Always watch energy flows, whether positive or negative, and who's in control. But when it comes to this third position, this self-determined style socialism, or the self-determination, this opposition to communism, and let's face it, communism was funded out of some parts of Anglosphere, and capitalism, of course, Anglosphere is big, Anglo-style capitalism, which is consistently under attack. You hear it under attack all over the world. Vladimir Putin attacked it. Everyone attacks it. Hugo Chavez attacks it. When Hugo Chavez came out and he came to power, he was they started a couple of internal insurrections, which of course caused a reaction by him, and then they hit him with their anti-Semitism charge, didn't they? They've also called him a Nazi. Well, he is not a Nazi. He's not a German, but he is a third positionist mentality. Now, he may call themselves communists. That's been a big theme of the last 50 years. You know, here you have someone that's basically, he's not interested in running the planet. He's just interested in doing his own thing in his own country. But he calls himself a communist, but he's not an international socialist. Communists were international socialists run by the Hebrews out of Moscow at that time, or the Bolsheviks at that time. Now, a lot happened after that, but you know, at the beginning of it, you can't really get around who financed out of, in this case, Wall Street. But he's not an international socialist. He's not interested in running the planet. He's just interested in his own thing. That's why they call him a Nazi. He's a third position. And the third position, again, controls a lot of different energy flows. Every single day of your life, you've been hit with something or tried to guilt trip over, even if you're American or Britain or whatever, you've been guilt tripped and beat to death over the Nazis, and you defeated them. So why are they doing that? Well, you know, it was a racial war by and large against certain parties, and they see it as a racial war against you, apparently, or against us. That's just common sense. Why you feel guilty over it, I don't know. It comes down to the feedback mechanism we have. And that's something that I'm going to talk about in the fourth position. The fourth position was developed, in my opinion, exclusively, or as I define it, on I believe it was Whitaker Online at the time. And Bob had developed the internal questions that the indigenous white rabbits of Europe ask. And we have an interesting, a unique feedback mechanism. We are always asking, is life worth living? And we were always asking, what is true? You know, time and time again, the racialists have talked about this fascination we have with objective truth, but it's a dual feedback mechanism. And what he developed was basically how wordism, any ism, really messes with that feedback mechanism. In other words, it creates a kink in the system. Is why, you know, no other animal on this planet asks that question: is life worth living? No. Beavers just go on living. They build beaver dams. 1,000 years from now, their beaver dams will still be the same. They're beavers. Mexicans walk across the border. They're just Mexicans. They're not. They don't ask that question. You know, you could say the Japanese kind of ask that question, and they go into escapism when they don't get a good answer. You know, Tokyo is like a big music park for the adults. They're not blending themselves out of existence. But the indigenous white rabbits of Europe asked that question. We ask this question: is life worth living? And that's an odd question, isn't it? It's a very odd question for an animal to ask, because if you ask that question, there's two answers. The first answer would be yes. There's another answer that's possible too: no. Yeah, you could get that big no answer. Life isn't worth living. But the mere fact that we ask the question is odd in itself. No other animal asks that question. They just live. You know, and 10,000 years from now, you know, they're not interested. Let me give you a great example on this feedback mechanism in action. Historically speaking, the indigenous white rabbits of Europe are always prone to suicide. every single one listening to this will be prone to suicide under the right circumstances.